No Myers Ahi, Dijo la Mujer Apache, Piero el Vaquero Miro Wailahizo Enfurecer. The sun was slowly climbing the horizon, painting the wide open plains with shades of gold and orange. Dust rose in faint swirls as a lone rider made his way along a winding dirt trail that cut through the vast expanse. The man was a vaquero, a seasoned cowboy who had spent most of his life on horseback. His skin was sun-browned, and his hands were calloused from years of work with cattle and ropes. His eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the horizon constantly, not only for dangers like rattlesnakes or hidden gullies but also for signs of life, an animal, a stream, or perhaps another human being in the vast wilderness. On this morning, the vaquero was traveling alone. The wind carried the faint smell of sagebrush, mixed with the earthy scent of the freshly turned soil. He enjoyed these moments of solitude, for they reminded him of a time when life was simpler. The trail beneath his horse's hooves was familiar, yet the openness of the plains always held surprises. Sometimes it was a herd of deer crossing in the distance, sometimes a lone hawk circling the skies. But today, something was different. A thin plume of smoke rose faintly in the distance, almost blending with the early morning mist. It was subtle, easily missed by someone who wasn't paying attention, but the vaquero had learned to notice the smallest details over the years. Curiosity stirred within him. The smoke could mean many things: a campfire, someone cooking breakfast, or perhaps even a trap. He guided his horse cautiously, slowing down as he approached the source. The smell of burning wood became more distinct as he drew closer, a soft, warm scent that made the air feel alive. Around him, the plain was quiet, save for the distant calls of birds and the faint rustling of the wind through tall grasses. He could see a few scattered rocks and low hills, but the land was mostly open, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. As he drew nearer, he noticed a figure sitting near the smoke. At first, he could not tell who it was. The figure moved with grace and purpose, seemingly aware of the land in a way that only someone who had lived closely with nature could be. As the vaquero approached a little closer, the figure came into sharper focus. It was a woman, and she carried herself with a calm, steady confidence. Her hair, dark and shiny, fell past her shoulders, and her clothing blended harmoniously with the natural surroundings. It was clear she was comfortable in this environment, perhaps more comfortable than the vaquero had ever been. The woman looked up briefly, her eyes sharp and watchful. She studied him carefully, as if measuring his intentions before deciding whether he was a threat or not. The vaquero, in turn, regarded her with a mix of respect and curiosity. He knew enough of the ways of the world to understand that this was not someone to approach recklessly. Yet, his curiosity was stirred even more. Something about her presence, quiet but commanding, made him want to know more. When he finally came to a stop a short distance from her, he saw that she was performing some kind of careful work. It was unclear exactly what she was doing, but it required focus and precision. The vaquero felt a twinge of hesitation. He had been taught to respect other people's spaces, especially when they were working alone. But at the same time, his natural curiosity made it almost impossible to simply turn away. He tilted his head slightly, trying to catch a glimpse of what had her so absorbed, but before he could take another step, the woman spoke. "Do not look there," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. The vaquero froze for a moment. Her words were calm, but there was an edge to them, a clear warning. He noticed that her eyes had darkened with a mixture of concern and intensity. She had not raised her voice, but the command carried weight. It was not the kind of instruction given lightly. It demanded attention and respect. The vaquero, who was used to dealing with unpredictable situations, sensed immediately that there was something important he was being warned about. Yet despite the warning, he felt a surge of curiosity. The words, "do not look," echoed in his mind, making him wonder why she was so insistent. What could be so sensitive that she would issue such a warning to a stranger? In that moment, the vast openness of the plains seemed to fade, replaced by a focused tension between the two of them. The vaquero's instinct was to respect boundaries, but a quiet part of him wanted to understand, to see what she was protecting. He looked at her for a moment, considering his next move. He was not a man who acted recklessly, but he had spent much of his life exploring, learning, and understanding things that others might ignore. And yet, something about this woman's presence made him pause. She was not aggressive, but her energy was commanding. It radiated a clear sense of authority over the land and the moment. The vaquero felt a strange mixture of respect, caution, and curiosity all at once. Finally, he made a choice. He decided to step closer, keeping his hands visible, and spoke in a calm, gentle tone. "I did not mean to intrude," he said. "I was only curious. If I have crossed a line, I apologize." The woman's eyes softened slightly, but the tension did not fully leave her expression. She studied him, as if evaluating the sincerity of his words. Then she returned her gaze to the spot she had warned him about, motioning subtly for him to step back. Her body language was clear. Some things in life required caution, patience, and respect. Some things were not meant to be shared immediately, not even with those who meant no harm. The vaquero remained still, sensing the weight of her unspoken message. He understood that curiosity, while natural, could sometimes lead to unintended consequences. There was a lesson here, one that went beyond what words could express. He felt a growing respect for her knowledge, her patience, and the way she seemed to exist so fully in her environment. There was wisdom in her actions, a quiet understanding of the land and the traditions she protected. As the morning light grew brighter, the plains around them seemed to take on a new quality. The dust shimmered in the sunlight, the grasses swayed gently, and the distant hills appeared more vibrant. The vaquero realized that this moment, brief as it was, carried a significance he could not yet fully understand. It was a lesson in observation, patience, and humility, a reminder that some things were not meant to be rushed or taken lightly. For a while, neither spoke. The only sounds were the faint clatter of the horse's hooves as it shifted weight and the gentle whisper of the wind. In that silence, the vaquero reflected on his life, on the countless trails he had ridden, and the many people he had met. He thought about the moments when he had acted too quickly, when curiosity had led him into trouble or caused unintended offense. And now, faced with this woman and her quiet warning, he recognized another opportunity to learn, another chance to practice patience and respect. The woman, in turn, continued her work with deliberate care. She seemed aware of his presence, yet she did not allow it to distract her. There was a rhythm to her actions, a harmony between her and the land that the vaquero could not help but admire. He realized that her warning, her words, were not merely about secrecy. They were about teaching, about showing the importance of understanding and respecting what we do not fully know. The vaquero stayed where he was, observing without intruding. He let his curiosity settle into quiet attention, learning from her without overstepping. Slowly, he felt a sense of connection, not just with her but with the land itself. The wide plains, the rising sun, the rustling grasses, and the clear, open sky. In that moment, he understood that some lessons were more powerful when experienced quietly, without force, without haste. As the morning moved forward, the vaquero made a silent promise to himself. He would respect her warning, he would respect the boundaries she set, and he would carry the lesson with him. Some things were sacred, some moments required patience, and some knowledge could only be earned through careful observation and respect. And so, with the rising sun casting a warm glow over the plains, the vaquero remained still, ready to learn, ready to observe, and ready to honor the wisdom of a woman who had shown him the power of quiet vigilance and careful respect. The vaquero remained where he was, his horse, shifting its weight gently beneath him, Yet his eyes never left the woman. Even though he had promised himself to respect her warning, curiosity still gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. It was not a curiosity born of disrespect, but of wonder. There was something about her, the way she moved, the calm yet commanding way she held herself, that made him want to understand more. The plains stretched endlessly around them, but in that small clearing it felt as if time had slowed, and the world had narrowed to just the two of them. The woman seemed aware of his continued attention. Her dark eyes flicked toward him occasionally, and the faint twitch of her brow suggested a mix of caution and patience. She was clearly deciding whether to trust this stranger or to keep her private space guarded. Every small movement she made, turning her hand slightly, adjusting her position, even the way she inhaled the crisp morning air, spoke volumes about her discipline and self-control. The vaquero, accustomed to reading body language after years on the trail, recognized these signs immediately. He understood that she was testing him, seeing if he could observe without interfering, if he could honor her boundaries without needing everything revealed. He swallowed a small laugh at his own growing impatience. He had faced dangerous animals, harsh weather, and men who had tried to deceive him, but this moment felt entirely different. There was no threat here, at least not in the traditional sense. The tension was subtle, built on unspoken understanding and mutual respect, or perhaps the lack of it at this moment. He shifted slightly, leaning back against the horse's flank, careful not to make any sudden movements that might startle her. Still, the fire of curiosity burned within him. He wanted to know why she had asked him not to look, what was so important that it needed to be kept hidden. He thought about the countless times in his life that he had seen things he wished he hadn't, and the consequences that sometimes followed. He knew that curiosity could be dangerous, but he also knew that when tempered with respect, it could lead to understanding and even friendship. Perhaps this was one of those moments, he thought. Perhaps there was something here that could teach him if only he approached it carefully. The woman finally spoke, her voice calm but carrying weight. "Curiosity is natural," she said, "but some things are meant to be understood slowly. Not everything can be known at once." The vaquero nodded slightly, acknowledging her words. They seemed simple, yet he sensed the depth behind them. It was clear that she was not merely warning him. She was teaching him something, guiding him toward understanding rather than dictating rules blindly. He stayed silent, letting her words sink in. There was a rhythm to her speech, a measured pace that seemed to echo the land itself. The plains were not hurried, the wind did not rush, and even the sun climbed the sky with steady determination. Perhaps she was reminding him that some things, no matter how tempting or fascinating, could not be forced. They had to be approached with patience, with respect, and with care. Despite his efforts to stay still, his eyes occasionally drifted toward the area she had warned him about. He caught glimpses of movement, a shift of light, a shadow passing over something, but nothing concrete. He realized then that the mystery was part of the lesson. It was not for him to uncover immediately. It was for him to learn how to wait, how to observe, and how to recognize the limits of his own understanding. The woman's attention, meanwhile, seemed focused on her work. He noticed the small movements of her hands, precise and deliberate. Each motion had a purpose, whether it was arranging objects, preparing something, or perhaps performing a ritual he did not yet understand. The vaquero could see the care she took in every action, the thoughtfulness behind each gesture. It reminded him of the times he had seen master craftsmen or skilled hunters in action. There was a rhythm, a connection, and an understanding that went beyond mere mechanics. The morning grew warmer, and the sun climbed higher into the sky, casting long shadows across the plains. The vaquero began to feel a strange sense of peace. Here, in this small clearing, he was not a lone traveler or a man who needed to conquer the land. He was a student, an observer, someone learning from the quiet authority of another person. It was a feeling he had rarely experienced, yet one that resonated deeply within him. Finally, unable to contain himself any longer, he spoke softly. "I do not mean to disrespect you," he said, "but I am curious. I want to understand. If you are willing, will you teach me why I should not look?" His voice was careful, respectful, carrying no hint of demand or force. He wanted to show that his curiosity was genuine, not reckless. The woman paused, her eyes meeting his for the first time in a long while. There was a flicker of emotion there, perhaps surprise, perhaps assessment, perhaps the faintest trace of amusement. She considered him for a long moment, weighing his sincerity against the potential risk of allowing him closer. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Some things can be shared," she said, "but you must promise to be patient. You must promise to observe, not interfere." The vaquero nodded eagerly, relieved that she had not rejected him outright. He felt a spark of excitement mixed with nervousness. He knew he had been granted a rare opportunity, one that could teach him lessons far beyond the ordinary experiences of life on the plains. He settled more firmly on his horse, ready to follow her guidance, ready to learn without overstepping. For the next hour, the two remained in that clearing, the woman performing her careful work while the vaquero observed from a respectful distance. He noticed details he had never considered before, the way her hands moved with precision, the slight shifts in her posture, the way she seemed to anticipate every step of her own actions. He realized that this was more than a task. It was a demonstration of discipline, focus, and harmony with the world around her. Gradually, he began to feel a sense of connection. It was not an immediate friendship, but a recognition of the shared human experience, the understanding that each person has boundaries, skills, and knowledge that are worth respecting. He began to appreciate the delicate balance she maintained, the way she honored her traditions and her space. And he understood that by observing without interference, he was participating in that balance, learning how to respect what he did not yet fully understand. At one point, a sudden gust of wind blew across the plains, lifting dust and small bits of debris into the air. The woman did not flinch. She continued her work, steady and unshaken. The vaquero marveled at her composure, realizing that true skill and understanding come not only from knowledge, but from the ability to remain calm and focused even when the world shifts around you. He felt inspired, realizing that there was much more to life than rushing, reacting, or assuming. There was value in stillness, in patience, and in quiet observation. As the morning moved closer to midday, the vaquero felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had come in search of a simple campsite or perhaps a passing encounter, but instead, he had stumbled upon a lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He understood that curiosity, while natural, needed to be guided by respect. He realized that the woman's initial warning, "Do not look there," was not merely a command, but an invitation to learn something far greater: the art of understanding without intrusion, the power of patience, and the wisdom of observing the world carefully. By the time the sun reached its peak, the vaquero and the woman had established a silent understanding. He would not look where he was told not to. He would not act without thought. He would honor the space she had created. In return, she had allowed him to witness her discipline, her focus, and her quiet authority. And in that exchange, he had gained a profound respect for her, for the land, and for the lessons that could only be learned through careful observation and patience. The vaquero knew that this experience was rare. In all his years traveling the plains, he had met few people whose presence could teach him so much without a single harsh word or forceful act. The woman's calm strength and quiet authority had shown him a new way of seeing the world, a way that valued respect, patience, and the understanding that some things are not meant to be seen immediately, but must be approached with care. As the shadows lengthened and the sun climbed higher, The vaquero remained where he was, fully present in the moment. He had learned to balance curiosity with respect, desire with patience, and observation with understanding. And as he watched the woman continue her work, he knew that the lessons of this morning would shape him in ways he could not yet fully comprehend. He had discovered that sometimes the greatest knowledge comes not from seeing everything at once, but from learning when to look and when to wait. The quiet of the morning seemed to stretch endlessly across the plains, but beneath that stillness, tension quietly began to build. The vaquero had spent hours observing the woman from a respectful distance, learning patience and the rhythm of her work. Yet, as the sun climbed higher and the warmth of the day grew stronger, his curiosity nudged him again. It was a quiet, persistent feeling, like the tug of a river under a calm surface. He told himself he would respect her instructions, yet the mystery of what lay just beyond her warning whispered to him, promising a glimpse into something extraordinary. The woman noticed the slight shift in his demeanor. Her sharp eyes, trained over years of experience and survival, picked up the tiny change in his posture, the way his gaze lingered just a little too long. She knew the pull of curiosity was strong, especially in someone like him, who had spent a lifetime exploring the unknown. Without raising her voice, she moved slightly to create a clearer boundary, a subtle reminder that some things were not meant to be crossed. But the vaquero, unaware of the full significance, felt the urge to understand what lay behind her caution growing stronger. He took a slow, careful step toward the edge of the area she had warned him about. It was a move that seemed innocent to him, almost natural. He reasoned that a single glance would not cause harm, that surely his curiosity, guided by respect, could be harmless. Yet the moment he turned his head and allowed his eyes to drift toward the hidden space, he felt a shift in the air around them. The wind seemed to pause, the quiet of the plains deepened, and the subtle tension between them became palpable. The woman's reaction was immediate. Her eyes widened slightly, not in fear but in a mixture of anger and deep disappointment. Her body tensed, and a quiet exhale of frustration escaped her lips. She stepped forward, her voice firm and commanding, breaking the silence that had enveloped the clearing. "I told you not to look," she said, her tone carrying the weight of authority and centuries of wisdom. The vaquero froze, realizing in that instant that he had crossed a line. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from a sudden understanding that his actions had consequences he had not anticipated. He raised his hand slowly, a gesture of surrender and apology. I didn't mean to offend you," he said, his voice calm but tinged with guilt. "I was only curious. I thought if I looked I might understand." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, studying him carefully. She could see the sincerity in his words, the genuine curiosity, but the act itself had broken the trust she had tentatively extended. Trust, she knew, was not given lightly, and once broken, it was much harder to restore. The woman took a deliberate step closer, closing some of the distance between them. Her presence was commanding, yet she did not raise her voice further. Instead, she allowed her gaze to communicate the depth of her displeasure. The vaquero felt a rush of emotions, regret, shame, and a deep desire to make amends. He realized that this moment was a turning point, not just in their interaction but in his understanding of boundaries, respect, and the weight of warnings given for good reason. "You must understand," she said slowly, her voice calm but firm. "There are things in this world that are sacred, things that hold meaning beyond what can be seen or understood at a glance. Some knowledge must be approached with patience, respect, and humility. To look without permission is to disrupt the balance, to take what is not yet ready to be shared." Her words carried a wisdom that went far beyond the plains, far beyond the simple curiosity that had brought him there. The vaquero listened intently, feeling the gravity of each sentence, recognizing that this lesson was one he would carry with him for the rest of his life. He lowered his gaze, acknowledging the truth in her words. "I see now," he said quietly. "I understand that my curiosity was not harmless. I did not realize the importance of what I was being asked to respect. Please, tell me how I can make this right." The woman paused, her eyes softening slightly, though the firmness of her stance remained. She was assessing not just his words but the intent behind them, the character of a man who had momentarily faltered but now sought to learn and understand. For several long moments, silence stretched between them. The plains around them continued in their quiet rhythm, the wind brushing through the grasses, the distant birds calling to one another. In that silence, the vaquero reflected on his actions. He thought about the countless times in his life he had let curiosity guide him, sometimes to knowledge, sometimes to trouble. He realized that this was one of those rare moments where understanding the proper way to approach something was more important than the act itself. He began to grasp that the world held lessons that could not be rushed or forced. Finally, the woman spoke again. "If you wish to learn," she said, "you must first learn patience. You must learn to observe without taking, to see without disrupting, to understand without demanding. Only then can you truly see what is meant to be seen." The vaquero nodded solemnly. He felt a mixture of relief and renewed determination. He understood that this was a chance not only to witness something extraordinary, but also to grow as a person, to practice humility and respect in a world that often tested those qualities. With careful movements, he shifted back slightly, showing that he would no longer overstep boundaries. The woman returned to her work, though now she allowed him to remain in her presence, under the silent condition that he observe without interference. The vaquero watched her with renewed focus, noticing details he had missed before. The subtle motions of her hands, the rhythm of her breathing, the way she interacted with the objects around her. Every action had meaning, and every gesture carried a lesson in discipline, respect, and attentiveness. As the morning wore on, the vaquero found himself drawn deeper into the rhythm of her work. He noticed how she seemed to communicate with the land itself, responding to the wind, the sunlight, and the subtle sounds around her. It was as if she were part of the plains, not separate from it. He realized that her warning had not been about keeping a secret for its own sake, but about teaching him to become aware, to engage with the world thoughtfully, and to recognize the value of boundaries. The woman glanced at him briefly, her expression softening just enough to show that she acknowledged his effort to understand. She had seen the shift in his demeanor, the way he had adjusted his actions, and she recognized the sincerity of his desire to learn. It was a delicate balance, trust given slowly, respect earned carefully. But in that moment she allowed him to continue observing, a silent teacher-student relationship forming between them. Suddenly, a small movement in the area he had been warned about caught his eye. He glanced briefly, careful not to stare or interfere. The woman noticed, and her eyes flicked to him with a mixture of caution and instruction. He immediately lowered his gaze, remembering her words and the lesson they carried. In that small, controlled moment, he felt a sense of understanding deepen within him. It was not about what he saw but how he approached it, how he chose to act in accordance with respect and awareness. Time seemed to stretch as they continued this delicate dance of observation and restraint. The sun climbed higher, the heat of the day warming the plains, and the wind shifted gently through the grasses. The vaquero felt a growing sense of connection, not just with the woman, but with the land, the moment, and the lessons embedded within both. He began to see that true understanding came not from immediate gratification or unchecked curiosity, but from patience, careful attention, and a willingness to listen and learn. By midday, the turning point was clear. The vaquero had learned more about himself in these few hours than he had in years on the trail. He understood the consequences of acting without thought, the importance of boundaries, and the value of listening to guidance from those with experience and wisdom. The woman, in turn, recognized his growth, the subtle shift in his demeanor, and the sincere effort he was making to honor her teachings. A quiet mutual respect had formed, unspoken but deeply felt. Finally, the woman spoke once more, her voice gentle but firm. Curiosity is not a flaw, but it must be guided. To look without permission is to take, but to observe with respect is to learn. You have begun to understand this, and that is the first step. The vaquero nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment mingled with humility. He knew the journey of learning was far from over, but this moment marked a significant turning point, a moment where understanding began to replace impulse, and respect began to shape his actions. As the sun reached its peak, casting warm light across the plains, the vaquero and the woman continued their quiet interaction. The lesson of the turning point, the moment where curiosity nearly led to disruption, had been absorbed. He felt a profound respect for her, not just for the work she was doing, but for the wisdom she carried and the patience with which she guided him. He realized that some lessons were learned not through words alone, but through experience, observation, and the careful navigation of boundaries. The turning point of the morning remained vivid in his mind. He had looked where he should not have, felt the immediate consequences, and now understood the power of restraint. The woman had not punished him with anger or force. Instead, she had taught him a lesson far deeper than mere words could convey. It was a lesson about curiosity, respect, patience, and the balance between knowing and waiting. And as the vaquero watched her continue her work, he knew that this moment, this turning point, would shape him forever. The vaquero stood quietly, a few steps behind the woman, feeling the weight of the lesson he had just learned pressing gently on his mind. The plains stretched endlessly around them, bathed in warm sunlight, but the space between them was filled with something far more significant than the open land. It was filled with understanding, tension, and the silent exchange of trust. He had passed the first test, but the deeper lessons were yet to come. He realized that true learning often comes not from a single moment of insight, but from facing the consequences of one's actions and reflecting on them. The woman turned slightly, her eyes scanning the distance as if measuring something invisible. The vaquero noticed the subtle change in her posture, the way her hands moved with a quiet determination, and the steady rhythm of her breathing. It was as though she was preparing him for the next stage of the lesson. He felt a mixture of anticipation and unease. He had learned patience, yet he knew that understanding the deeper meaning of her warning required more than simply waiting. It required reflection, focus, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about his own behavior. Slowly, she began to speak, her voice calm but carrying a weight that demanded attention. "Curiosity is a gift, but it can also be dangerous," she said. "It pushes us forward, teaches us, opens doors, but it can also blind us if we do not temper it with respect. You have seen this today. You have felt the consequences of looking when told not to. Now you must see why these boundaries exist, why some things must remain unseen until the right time, and why some knowledge is earned, not taken." The vaquero nodded, feeling a sense of humility wash over him. He realized that in his moment of curiosity, he had not fully appreciated the responsibility that comes with observation. It was one thing to see, but another entirely to understand. To witness without disrupting, to learn without taking, was a skill he had not fully mastered. He looked at the woman, noticing her calm authority and the subtle strength in her gaze. She was teaching him not with anger or punishment, but with guidance and the expectation that he would rise to meet it. For a while, they moved silently together through the small clearing. The woman's actions became more deliberate, and the vaquero observed every detail with care. He noticed the precision in her movements, the way she seemed to communicate with the land, the plants, and the subtle creatures that crossed their path. Each gesture had meaning, each pause was purposeful. He realized that the lesson was not only about restraint, but also about attentiveness, truly seeing the world, understanding it, and respecting it without imposing his own will. Then she paused and gestured toward the edge of the hidden space he had looked at earlier. "You saw a glimpse," she said softly, "but only a glimpse. That was enough to remind you that some knowledge cannot be rushed. To take more than is given is to invite imbalance into your life. Life itself is a balance between curiosity and caution, between action and restraint. Every choice you make has consequences, whether seen or unseen." The vaquero absorbed her words, feeling their truth settle deep within him. He reflected on the countless times in his life that he had acted without consideration, trusting instinct alone, letting curiosity or desire guide him. Some actions had brought rewards, others had brought trouble, and he realized now that each choice carried more weight than he had imagined. The lesson she was teaching him extended beyond this moment, beyond the plains, beyond the morning. They were lessons for life itself. The woman knelt briefly, examining something small on the ground. The vaquero noticed that it was part of a careful arrangement, something that required patience and attention to detail. He understood that this was more than mere work. It was a ritual, a practice that connected her to the land, to her traditions, and to knowledge that had been passed down through generations. He felt a growing respect for her discipline and the wisdom embedded in each small act. As the day moved forward, the vaquero began to reflect on his own actions. He thought about the moment when he had looked where he was told not to, the immediate change in her demeanor, and the subtle yet powerful tension that had followed. He realized that curiosity, unchecked, can disturb not only the external world, but also the trust and relationships that bind people together. He understood now that respect is not merely a courtesy, it is a form of wisdom, a tool that allows one to navigate the complexities of life with care. The woman spoke again, her tone gentle but firm. "You must understand that every action has meaning. Some are obvious, some are hidden, and some affect more than you can see. Today, you began to see that curiosity must be balanced with respect. Tomorrow, you will learn to carry this understanding into everything you do. And the day after, you will continue to refine it until it becomes a part of who you are." The vaquero nodded, realizing that this was no ordinary lesson. It was a deep, personal awakening, one that required introspection, humility, and the willingness to learn from someone whose knowledge extended far beyond the obvious. He understood that the woman was not merely instructing him on a specific action or rule, but guiding him toward a broader understanding of life itself, the way curiosity, patience, respect, and observation could shape a person's character. He glanced at her, noticing the subtle pride in her expression, though it was tempered by seriousness. She was testing not only his actions, but also his ability to internalize lessons, to reflect on the meaning behind them, and to apply that understanding without immediate guidance. It was a delicate balance, one that required both courage and patience. The vaquero felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, a feeling both sobering and inspiring. For hours, they moved together through the clearing, the woman demonstrating her practices, the vaquero observing with careful attention. The sun climbed higher, and the warmth of the day brought a soft glow to the plains. Yet the lesson remained intense and immersive. Every small movement, every gesture, every subtle interaction carried meaning. The vaquero learned to notice not only the obvious but also the hidden, to see what was not immediately apparent, and to understand that true learning comes from more than just observation. It comes from reflection, patience, and respect. At one point, a small bird landed near them, hopping lightly on the grasses. The woman did not flinch. She remained focused on her work, yet the vaquero noticed how she acknowledged the bird's presence without disturbing it. That small interaction became another lesson. He realized that the world was full of moments that required awareness and care, and that even the smallest actions could have significance. To move through life thoughtlessly is to risk disrupting the balance, but to move with awareness is to live harmoniously with the world around you. As the afternoon approached, the vaquero felt a growing sense of understanding. He had begun to see that his previous way of moving through the world, guided by instinct and curiosity alone, was incomplete. There was a deeper path, one that required observation without interference, patience without frustration, and curiosity tempered with respect. He looked at the woman with gratitude, recognizing the depth of what she was teaching him. This was more than a lesson about boundaries. It was a lesson about living wisely, thoughtfully, and in harmony with the world. The woman spoke once more, her voice gentle but filled with authority. The world is full of things meant to be discovered, but discovery is not the same as taking. To see without permission is to disrupt. To learn without understanding is to risk harm. Today, you have begun to understand this, but the journey is long. Each choice you make from this moment forward will shape who you become. Remember this lesson well. The vaquero nodded solemnly, feeling the truth of her words resonate deeply within him. He realized that the true challenge of life is not in avoiding mistakes entirely, but in learning from them, reflecting on their meaning, and adjusting one's actions accordingly. He understood that respect, patience, and awareness were not limitations, but guides, helping him navigate the complexities of the world with wisdom and care. As the shadows grew longer across the plains, the vaquero and the woman moved slowly back toward the center of the clearing. He observed her every movement, noticing the care, attention, and precision she applied to each task. He felt a quiet sense of admiration and gratitude. The lessons of the day were far from over, but he had reached a new level of understanding, a deeper awareness of the consequences of curiosity, the importance of boundaries, and the value of patience and reflection. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold, the vaquero knew that this day would remain with him forever. He had experienced the deep conflict between curiosity and restraint, and through it, he had learned invaluable lessons about himself, about respect, and about the way the world works. He had been tested, he had faltered, and he had begun to grow. And in that growth, he realized the true meaning of the woman's warning. Some things are sacred, some knowledge must be earned, and some lessons can only be learned through patience, reflection, and respect. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, casting long, warm shadows across the plains, the vaquero felt a calm settle over him. The lessons of the morning and afternoon lingered in his mind, intertwining with the rhythm of the land and the quiet presence of the woman. He had learned about curiosity, patience, and respect, and he now understood how powerful it could be to observe without interfering. The woman, noticing his contemplative silence, finally allowed a faint smile to cross her face. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried approval and a quiet sense of connection. The vaquero had spent the day absorbing her teachings, watching carefully, and reflecting deeply. He realized that true wisdom comes not from simply seeing, but from understanding the meaning behind what is seen, and from recognizing the boundaries that guide proper conduct. The woman's warning, "Do not look there," which had seemed so mysterious at first, now made perfect sense. It was not merely a restriction, it was an invitation to learn, to practice restraint, and to gain insight into life itself. For the first time, he felt that he had begun to grasp the depth of her knowledge. He observed how she moved with deliberate care, how she interacted with the land, and how even the smallest action held significance. Every gesture was a lesson in discipline, patience, and harmony. He thought about the countless moments in his life when he had acted hastily or without full understanding, and he realized that his experiences that day had given him something far greater than simple knowledge. They had given him insight, a way to approach the world with respect and awareness. The woman spoke quietly, her voice carrying across the gentle breeze. You have seen much today, but true understanding comes when you carry these lessons into the world beyond this place. Respect, patience, and observation are not only for this clearing or these plains, they are for every choice you make, every step you take, and every interaction you have. The vaquero nodded, absorbing her words. He knew that she was guiding him not just for the moment, but for life itself. He looked around at the open plains, feeling a deep connection to the land that had witnessed this encounter. The wind brushed softly against his face, carrying the scent of sagebrush and dry earth. He realized that the world was full of moments like these, moments that demanded careful attention, patience, and respect. He understood that the lessons he had learned were not confined to this place. They were universal truths, applicable to any situation, any person, and any time in life. The woman gestured toward a small path leading further into the plains. You may go closer now, she said, her voice calm but carrying authority. But remember, observing does not mean taking. You may watch, but you must not disturb. You may learn, but you must not force knowledge. The vaquero approached carefully, feeling a mixture of anticipation and reverence. He knew that he was being trusted, and he understood the responsibility that came with that trust. As he drew near, he caught sight of the small, sacred arrangement she had been tending all day. It was subtle and intricate, a harmony of natural elements that seemed almost alive. He observed with careful attention, noticing the deliberate placement of each item, the way the sunlight illuminated the patterns, and the gentle balance that had been maintained throughout the day. He felt a profound respect for the woman's skill and wisdom, and he silently vowed to carry this respect with him always. The woman watched him closely, seeing how he absorbed the lessons without overstepping boundaries. She could sense the change in him, the way he had grown more mindful, more patient, and more aware. Her eyes softened and she spoke once more. You have learned well, but remember, the lessons do not end here. Life is full of tests, challenges, and moments that demand awareness and care. Take what you have learned today and let it guide you in all things. Let it shape your actions, your words, and your understanding of the world. The vaquero nodded solemnly, feeling the weight and significance of her words. He realized that he had been given something far more valuable than he had initially imagined, a gift of wisdom, insight, and perspective. He thought about how often he had rushed into situations without considering consequences, how frequently he had allowed curiosity to override caution, and how much he had yet to learn. This day, however, had shown him a new path, one that balanced curiosity with respect, observation with understanding, and action with reflection. For a while, they remained in silence, connected not by words but by shared understanding. The plains seemed to hold their breath, as if acknowledging the significance of this moment. The vaquero felt a deep sense of gratitude toward the woman, recognizing the patience and guidance she had shown him. He realized that her warning, which had once sparked frustration and curiosity, had become a profound lesson in humility and awareness. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky with hues of orange, pink, and gold, the vaquero prepared to leave. He knew that it was time to return to his journey, to continue traveling the plains, but he also understood that he would carry these lessons with him wherever he went. He looked at the woman, and in her eyes, he saw the quiet acknowledgement of his growth and the respect she had for his willingness to learn. "Thank you," he said sincerely, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "I will remember everything you have taught me today. I will honor your guidance and carry it with me in all that I do." The woman inclined her head slightly, a gesture of approval and recognition. "Go with awareness," she said. "Move through the world carefully and let your actions reflect the lessons you have learned." The vaquero mounted his horse, feeling a mixture of reflection, gratitude, and newfound understanding. As he rode away, he kept his gaze steady, mindful of the land beneath his feet and the wind against his face. Every movement, every choice, every step was informed by the lessons he had absorbed. He understood that curiosity, when guided by respect and patience, could lead to wisdom and insight, but that recklessness could disrupt the balance of life. The plains stretched endlessly before him, filled with the promise of new experiences, new challenges, and new opportunities to apply what he had learned. Yet he felt different now, more mindful, more patient, and more aware of the subtle lessons that life presented every day. He realized that every encounter, every observation, every choice carried meaning, and that true understanding came not from seeing everything at once, but from observing, reflecting, and learning with respect and care. As the evening grew deeper, the sky fading into shades of deep purple and blue, the vaquero felt a profound sense of peace. The encounter with the woman had changed him in ways he could not fully articulate, yet he felt it in every movement, every breath, and every thought. He knew that this day, this moment, would stay with him for the rest of his life, a reminder of the power of respect, patience, and mindful observation. He thought back to the woman's initial warning, "Do not look there." What had once seemed a simple instruction now carried layers of meaning, a message about boundaries, trust, and the careful navigation of life's mysteries. He understood that the lesson extended beyond the plains, beyond that morning, beyond the woman herself. It was a lesson about life, about learning, and about the importance of balancing curiosity with respect, desire with restraint, and observation with understanding. As night fell, the vaquero rode on, the stars beginning to appear in the vast sky above him. He felt the weight of the day's lessons settle comfortably within him, a quiet guidance that would shape his choices and actions from that moment forward. He knew that he had been changed, not through punishment or fear, but through the careful guidance and wisdom of a woman who had understood how to teach without force, how to guide without imposing, and how to open the mind without taking away freedom. By the time he reached the edge of the plains, where the first hints of a distant town appeared on the horizon, the vaquero felt a renewed sense of purpose. He carried with him the lessons of the day, the memory of the woman's calm authority, and the deep understanding that life's most important truths are often learned quietly, through observation, reflection, and respect. The journey ahead was long, but he now understood how to move through it with awareness, patience, and a mindful heart. And so, as he rode into the evening, the wind brushing gently against his face, the vaquero knew that he had gained more than knowledge. He had gained wisdom, perspective, and a newfound understanding of the delicate balance between curiosity and respect. The plains stretched endlessly before him, and he rode forward with a heart open to learning, a mind ready to observe, and a spirit committed to living with awareness. The lesson of the day and of the woman who had guided him would remain with him forever,